Thank you for visiting this limited series. The infection was initially mild, my small town city council run, the toxic American pandemic response, and what both mean for the future of the country, written by Heather Christina Schmidt. You can view the entire series now on schmidttalks.com or subscribe to get it sent in parts to your email box weekly.
Ultimately, in the end, I was outspent. Outspent from a monetary standpoint. Outspent in political capital. Outspent in will to even win the damn thing. That sounds like I gave up, but what really happened was that I realized I could effect much more change simply by speaking up, rather than by being elected. Too many people get elected and it changes them. The reality of their re-election hits them smack in the face at the moment they take their oath of office, and it fundamentally changes who they are. I didn't want to be changed. I didn't want to be politicized as an individual in my principles and beliefs, and I saw it becoming more clear that I would have to do that, to compromise my standards in order to win. I chose not to, and suffered the consequence. That consequence? I got outspent. Of course I pushed on and campaigned to the bitter end. On the weekend before the election, as voting began all over the district, I did another email campaign, text, and phone bank push to every home in the district. With over 70% of ballots that would ultimately be cast already in at that point, this seems like it was all for naught, but, again, in doing this, I was able to still get my message across. While I had the opportunity to lift people's ear, I did. That message? To be safe. To wear a mask. Vaccines were coming, when they did arrive, get one as soon as they became eligible. Call me if they needed resources. Call me if they needed an advocate. The election was just weeks before the pandemic was about to get significantly worse, and with clear indication that I was not going to win, I felt an obligation to reach as many people as I could. My opponent, and the entire city and city council for that matter, could not care less if people got sick and died, if the hospitals were overrun, if people lost their homes and starved. Even the nurse. Running for city council, if anything, reminded me that I did not need to be elected to work, organize, and have an impact on my community. In the end, though, the will, the way, and the money made sure that do it as a private citizen was the only way I would. My will to win faded towards the end of the campaign. Even though, as I said, I fought until the polls closed, I increasingly became concerned about what would happen if I actually did win. For months, my family endured the type of harassment that I had never witnessed in all of the elections I had worked on before. After college, I worked on a lot of campaigns. Big campaigns, small campaigns, campaigns as a volunteer, as an intern. I worked on campaigns as a full-time employee with a big title. Never did I see the type of vitriol and hatred spewed at the direction of a candidate as was spewed in mine. Over a city council seat in a small, suburban community of around 70,000 people. But then social media was not as pervasive to daily life back then. The type of comments that were made to me on social media were the stuff of nightmares. People called me innocent things that were easy to ignore, like democratic socialist, and at the same time things so horrific and personal, it made my skin crawl. But the name-calling wasn't the extent of it. I got text messages on my campaign phone telling me I was a dirty whore, and that people were coming to get me. My entire family was doxxed online in the comments sections of our local newspapers. Strangers knew oddly specific details about our daily lives. On an average day, my kids and I would be heading out the front door in the morning to get to whatever we had going on for the day, to find trash had been thrown at our house. On more than one occasion, we had to call the police because my kids were being followed. Of course, after the election, I thought all this would abate. It did not. My kids being following only intensified. Trash thrown at my front door became a nightly thing for a while. People texted my old campaign line telling me to kill myself. Supporters of my opponent hacked my business social media pages, stole my credit card numbers, you name it, they got a hold of it. A few months after the election, I got a text from the organizer of the Democratic Moms group, calling me a racist because I didn't support one of the city council members taking a turn as mayor. That council member was white, all of them are. Nevertheless, I apologized for any misunderstanding. I was still removed unilaterally by this woman from the group, and she and a couple other Democratic moms began smearing my name in every organization I had been a part of. Even sports groups my kids were in that had nothing to do with politics. Later, I found out that this woman was good friends with my opponent, so much so that they had dinner together on Sundays. Her insistence on not being able to display one of my campaign signs on her lawn, which had no less than 10 others on it, suddenly made sense. Campaign signs, or rather the replacement of them, ended up being my biggest expense. This was because they were regularly destroyed, ripped out of the ground, vandalized, and disappearing in the night. This ended up becoming a full-time endeavor, replacing the signs, repeatedly. Closer to the election, I just gave up replacing them, having run out of money and the will to keep returning to the same spots day after day to find mine, the only one in the group of all the candidates' signs, gone. When I started out, I had 256 signs around town, on top of the yard signs people had on their own private property, that I had gotten permission to display, along with all the other candidate signs out on these corners. The night of the election, when I went to collect what remained, there were only 12 left. In my opponent's first election to the city council, he spent somewhere in the ballpark of $40,000, most of his own money, to be elected. This was an unfeasible sum to me for a city council district seat that pays around $1,500 a month.
My small
I
town
could
city
understand
council
wanting
run,
to do
the
it for your
toxic American
community,
pandemic
but that sum of
response,
money
and what
seemed
both
not
mean
just
for the future of
ridiculous,
the
but
country,
wasteful
written by
and
Heather
suspect.
Christina Schmidt, or come back next week
I
for the
figured
next
this was what I
installation
was
on
going to be up against,
schmidtalks.com.
somewhere around
Thank you to our sponsors
$40,000,
and
which all of
subscribers
my
like you.
advisors and
Stay
campaign
healthy, stay
volunteers
safe,
agreed would
stay
probably
aware.
be the sum to beat. I didn't have any intention of fundraising to such a degree, nor did I plan to spend that much of my own money in such large sum. But I knew I could get close to 25% of that in contribution and in my own donations, and make a considerable showing in the race. What I didn't anticipate was that my opponent would go above and beyond to the tune of $75,000. Between his own personal loan to his campaign of $15,000, contributions from local business owners, law firms, and land developers, and tens of thousands of dollars from the police, who never even returned my call, and firefighters' unions, my opponent simply raised, and subsequently spent, well more than I could have even anticipated someone would spend for a city council seat. But it was more complicated than simply dollar-by-dollar campaign spending. At least in my view. While my volunteers were largely staying home and keeping safe due to the pandemic, the bulk of his supporters didn't even believe in COVID and were paid to go out and walk precincts. While my fundraisers were held virtually and in an effort to social distance, his were in person, in people's homes, which you knew had happened because the following day the entire street would be lined with his campaign signs. And as it turned out, cronyism had truly taken hold of the community in insidious ways. What I left of politics over a decade prior to the campaign was gone. I returned to a wasteland of toxic identity politics and capitalistic city control. I knew that politics locally were something of a black hole before, but at least then I knew who stood by what principles. Quickly, what remained of my political capital and these notions as to how things stood was clearly very little. People on all sides politically in our city, and in the county at large, were now on the same side, the financial and political exploitation side. Using power in public office or appointment as a position from which they could fund their own personal, financial endeavors, people had either lined up for their cut, or left politics behind.
Keep going to continue. The infection was initially mild, my small town city council run, the toxic American pandemic response, and what both mean for the future of the country, written by Heather Christina Schmidt, or come back next week for the next installation on schmidtalks.com. Thank you to our sponsors, and subscribers like you. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay aware.